because part of their goal today is to think about how to reframe how we discuss philanthropy as it relates to Arizona State University. And as you probably all have seen and observed, a lot of stories around philanthropy and donations to Arizona State University are centered around student scholarships, but they are realizing that there's so much more to philanthropy at ASU, especially within the last 3 years since 2020, when ASU launched the LIFT initiative. If you haven't already heard today that the community-driven archives was one of the items, 25 action items featured by President Crow after George Floyd's murder in 2020, in order for ASU to do its part to hold community accountable for how Black faculty, staff, and students come through this university and find their way to thrive in our larger community. As you all know, Arizona State University also prides itself on being an institution that wants to be an ongoing contributor to the communities we serve. And so as we think about philanthropy and how people give to the institution, we want to broaden that lens. The foundation folks are here in order to think about how to broaden that lens. Genevieve is the social media chair. So those of you who are alumni, especially in the break after this session and before the next, they'll actually be here till 3, chat with them, share stories about your experiences at ASU, and help a larger external community think about why they would want to give to this institution, and especially this activity right here, which, as you all know, is really important. You may remember how Carter G. Woodson said that if a culture doesn't have a history, then it doesn't exist in large part. And then is at threat of being erased. I would say it's always at threat of being exploited. All of the stories today are important for how we know ourselves and document who we are in this community. Lots of Americans love to look to the future and imagine that the past is just something back there that doesn't affect our lives and our daily lives today. But we all know that that is no more realistic than telling a child to forget what happened in their childhood. So as a nation and as a state, we have to document and share our histories. As an institution, we have to document and share what we know about this place, because this place cultivates leaders or not. And if we want this place to cultivate leaders who can be inclusive and sharing in the way they go about their lives and the way they treat their employees and the way they raise their children in this state in order for us to be here for the long term, then we have to think about how every group is documented and how they share their memories and what they tell about this place. So to that end, our archivists have invited ASU alumni to the table to talk about some of their memories of Arizona State University. And in that memory sharing, they can help us chart a path forward for the university that we want. This is an evolving place. It's an evolving story, and we are all contributors to the story and how we are here. I am not an Arizona native. I've spent 25 years in Arizona, which is a little bit like more than half of my adult life. But I have spent all of that time here at ASU. So ASU is extremely precious and valuable and important to me. So it is really an honor that I get to draw out stories from some of my favorite alumni who I know from being active in the community. I would like them to introduce themselves. Now, one of them you met earlier, and I brought her back on because she has wonderful stories to tell. So we're just going to do a real super brief introduction. And then our 3 new panelists also have video stories to share, as did Josephine. So Josephine, can you reintroduce yourself to everyone? And then we'll just go down the line till we get here.
Good afternoon. No, it's not on. Good afternoon. I'm Josephine Pete, and I was asked to come back to the panel because I'm a 1960 graduate of ASU. And our class was the class that marched down to the Capitol and politely asked if we could become a university. So I go all the way back to those days when things were very different, and this audience would
This is weird. I don't understand.
It does today.
Thank you for coming back, Josephine.
Mm-hmm.
Virgil.
My name is Virgil J. Berry Jr., and I'm a graduate of 1982, an East High graduate of 1975, of which she was my assistant vice principal at the school. And my family's been here since 1949, and we have several graduates. Almost 14 graduates have graduated from ASU from our family, cousins, and everything. So ASU is very, very dear to us.
Tracee, we'll do the slides after you've all introduced yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracee Hall, and I am an assistant director with the City of Phoenix Parks and Recreation Department. I graduated from ASU in 95 with my undergraduate degree, in 2000 in graduate school. Both my parents attended ASU. My father's currently in the ASU Hall of Fame for football. My grandfather attended ASU. I have a niece and nephew here now. And I've had plenty of family either work for the institution or attend the institution. And when you want to talk about community connections, my grandmother, who was a realtor, worked for Virgil Berry's father at the time. And my mother, Dr. Josephine Peach, was one of her high school counselors. So just it all comes full circle at Phoenix Union High School. So it can all come full circle in small communities, like the small Black communities like that.
Michele.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. My name is Michele Neptune McHenry, and although I'm not a native of Arizona, my husband was, and his name is Joseph McHenry, and he was born here in Phoenix in 1943. And the reason that I was invited to the panel is because through doing some genealogy work and connecting with the wonderful Shannon Walker, one of the archivists here at ASU, we were able to determine that my husband's aunt, Estella McHenry, was the first female African-American graduate of Arizona State University when it was Tempe Teachers College. I'm going to forget. It went through a few names. And my husband attended as well. And his father attended. And his brother and his other sister, Consuelo McHenry, also attended when it was Tempe Teachers College of some sort. And Consuelo was also a journalist for the Arizona Gleam during the time that she was attending the university as well. So ASU is very near and dear to our family's heart, and the ASU community has embraced me in helping me to learn more about my husband's family history here and to help share that with all of you as well. Thank you for this opportunity.
So as you can see from our four panelists, Arizona State University draws in a lot of whole families. So whole families come through this institution. What Virgil didn't mention is that his son, a recent graduate, is hiding in the back corner there.
He's the rookie, the latest graduate.
And for all of us as faculty, staff, and researchers at Arizona State University, I think it's important for us to be intentional about our current students, knowing that they are legacies of families or potential seedlings for future families. And so as we embrace the families that have come through in the past, let's think very intentionally about how we help our current students build their families through this institution, knowing that we're going to influence multiple generations of Arizona State people who live in the state of Arizona and in our cities, as all of these four have shown us already. So each of you have brought a video to share with us. We had Josephine's Okima video earlier, but also Virgil, Tracee, and Michele have brought visuals to share. And in the process of sharing those videos, can you also reflect on your experiences at ASU too? We're going to start with Virgil.
Well, you know, being a Kappa, member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, we had a tendency to have a few parties. And so, you know, I want to make sure that everybody understands I had the well-rounded education when I was here. And this is a group of my guys. And, you know, when back in 1982, there weren't a lot of African-Americans on the campus. There's maybe 500. And the fraternities and sororities were really the only relationship that we had with one another. And at that particular time, we almost had 30 Kappas on the yard. I don't know if all of them were eligible, but I do know that we did have 30 on the yard at that particular time. And we did things like we gave a free picnic to the university on an annual basis. We raised money. We had more money than the alumni at that time. And because I was in charge of it, but we did these in the community, and we would finance political candidates, and we did this back in '82, back when it was not even heard of, but we were getting a taste of what real life is all about. And if I'd be remiss, my daughter, she graduated 2000. The next slide.
Next one.
The two individuals on the left are my mother and father, graduates in 1954. My mother came to ASU on a tennis scholarship, if you can believe it, in 1950. And she stayed in the dorm right around the corner over there. I think she was the first one to stay, African-American, stay in that dorm. So, and my father, who's deceased now, he came here from Oklahoma because he got tired of picking cotton. So he came here and started a real estate business in 1960. And certainly the other guy, there was a young guy, myself, graduated from college. Thank you. Next slide. The pretty young lady on the right is my wife. She graduated from ASU Law School in 1985, and she's a retired judge from the city of Phoenix. And my daughter is following her footsteps to be a lawyer also. Those two right there are back there, and that's what you get after all the money that you spend. They laugh at me, but I take them graduation pictures, you know what I'm saying?
We appreciate the money, by the way.
And this is a good one when my son graduated. I had to show you. This is my family right here. The one on the right is a wayward sister of mine. She went to Spelman. She got away from us, but certainly my wife, and that's my 91-year-old mother. She's still living, and she still remembers ASU wholeheartedly. And she had a story when I was in high school. They wouldn't let me into an English class. And so at 9 o'clock at night, she called this lady named Josephine Pete and told them they wouldn't let me in the English class. So when I got to class the next day, my name was on that English class docket and stuff. So I always loved Miss Pete. But and then certainly my son and my daughter and myself and my secretary. And we, like I said, we're ASU people. My father took me to games at a young age, and it's almost like once it gets into you internally, you always stay here. And I'm proud to say that we've had a lot of family members like other panelists graduate from Arizona State University. And I think that we do need to do more as far as making a connection with ASU on an ongoing basis. And that's something I think I'd like to do. And the other young lady that was speaking before us in the mapping, we want to get with her also to share East Lake neighborhood with her and the historical aspects that go along with East Lake neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Virgil. Tracee.
Oh, you want to talk about your project?
Oh, there's more.
I'm sorry. This, if you can see, I want you guys to imagine this. My father came from Oklahoma in a car, didn't have a lot of money, had to go to Phoenix College and start the real estate business in 1960. And here we are, 2023, and our real estate project is going to be a hotel and an apartment complex in downtown Phoenix. And that's how much it's grown. And that's how much we thank the community for being involved with Realty.
That is fantastic.
That's not enough. That's not all, but only got a few minutes in the day.
We'll cycle back. So hold those stories. We'll cycle back. Tracee.
Let's get the slides up. Again, I'm Tracee, and I think we've got some slides to share. I really wanted to talk about visually my connection to ASU and how deep it runs, and I kind of articulated that a little bit. I started at ASU in 1991, I believe, and I was a transfer student. I went to Glendale Community College my first year because I was dead set on going to HBCU. My mom was like, well, you better find some HBCU money. And I did not. And so I went to community college, but I also was a cheerleader, and I was cheering for that college. And then I got a scholarship called the ABC. It's called the Alliance of Black Community Support Scholarship. That was funded through the Urban League, and it was a full tuition waiver. And I got word that I got the scholarship I'm not even sure if I applied or my mom applied. Let's be honest, I don't remember. I'm sure I did, right? But I got word of it right before school started. So I found out I was going to ASU within a couple of weeks. And thank goodness there was a network, a woman by the name of Dr. Deborah Brohard was here, who took me under my wings, registered me for class, put me in her class, which I'll talk about, MCE 394, which all the African-American students took at the time and all the athletes, that helped me in my trajectory here. So next slide, please. So these are pictures of my graduations. The top and the cap and gown was when, again, I graduated with the BA in sociology in 1995. At the bottom, you'll see various members of my family, including my parents, my paternal grandparents, 3 of my sisters, 1 who attended here, 1 who worked here. That's Anne. And then the other picture you'll see when I graduated in 2000, when I got my MPA. And at that time I had a son while I was going through graduate school, and that's him now. He's about to be 25. And then my mother and my sister. All right, next slide, please. So talking about a Sun Devil legacy, in the middle, you'll see my grandfather's diploma. And so he got a degree in education in 1954 was Arizona State College of Tempe. So it wasn't the university at the time. And then my father came here from California, was recruited by a coach named Frank Cush, sight unseen, and came in the spring because he was on a quarter system, and played football here for, I think, 3 or 4 years before he was recruited in 1971 to play in the NFL. And again, my father in 92 was inducted into ASU's Hall of Fame. Another interesting note, his brother, Reedy Hall, also played at ASU under Frank Cush. And then he recruited other people from his high school to stay with him at the time. And then on the other side of the screen, you'll see my mother, and I put that picture up. It's not a very clear picture. I'm a newborn baby, you can see, and my mother's shirt is a Sun Devil with an afro. And I was like, why did they have those when I was at ASU? But it was a soulful Sun Devil. And so I wanted to show that. And then in the bottom picture is when she obtained her MSW, or master's degree in social work. I don't know why my hair wasn't combed in the picture. We'll have to ask my mom about that. But also is my grandfather in the picture, Charles Bryant. And then on the other end was my great aunt. Her name was Jewel Smith, who was also a graduate of ASU and became a teacher. So that's the family connection lineage. And then the next slide. And then I just wanted to show the various Sun Devil connections and how college in itself, but specifically ASU for me, can connect. So I have my sister who has an MBA. And then below that, my niece who just graduated last year from ASU, and she is now working for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And then at the bottom are my niece and nephew who are now attending ASU. And then towards the end is a picture right towards my left of the picture is my aunt, my mother's sister, who attended Arizona State University, and she was a member of my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And she was, they chartered the chapter here in 1973 for Delta Sigma Theta Iota Kappa chapter. I went through another chapter, but so all these ASU connections. In the middle, you'll see my sister, who no longer works for ASU, but I think worked for ASU about 8-9 years as a director of equity and inclusion. And that was a feature that ASU had on her because she's also a ranking officer, a JAG officer in the US Army. And then my fiance, when he attended ASU, and then at the end is my dad and my uncle, who again, both played football at ASU. So just kind of going through and then my children. Who my oldest one graduated from Willamette University in Oregon. My 2 younger one, we're still waiting to see where they're going to go.
That's it. Yay. So again, a theme emerging of how ASU cultivates families, whole Black families in this community. Another double devil walked in a few minutes ago, Suzanne Wilson, who is also a fantastic storyteller. And As Michele Neptune is telling us the story of finding Estella McHenry's history here, we're going to be going back to a different era. And while she's telling her story, I would love the Sun Devils in the room to also be thinking about how to engage in this panel and share stories with the institution that other folks may or may not know about. There's quite a few Sun Devils with history in this room, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to capture it. So Michele, tell us about the story of Estella McHenry.
Well, Stella, as I said earlier, was my husband's aunt. He did not know that she was his aunt. We discovered some old family pictures through doing some genealogy work, and we had her name, we had her picture, and it looked like it was a graduation picture of some sort, but we didn't know who she was. He didn't even know at the time that that was his aunt. His father had died when he was quite young, and he didn't get to know any of his father's family as he was growing up. So when we started digging around, and thank goodness for the internet and for archivists, we started just taking a look at seeing who we could find. And we just continued to explore a variety of different pieces of information and came across Stella through the work of the Tempe Museum, because they wrote a book called The African American Experience in Tempe, written by Jared Smith, who's still with the Tempe Museum. And after I'd been Googling and Googling and Googling, all of a sudden one day I Googled Stella, and up comes a reference to her in that book. So I was curious about, well, what do you mean? I know that name, who is she? And in the book and through the work through the Tempe Museum, they also have an African American advisory committee that they've had, I think, for over 20 years. I don't know, don't quote me on that. So I called to see if Jared was still at the museum. He was. He helped me in understanding the work that the council and the museum had done. And he remembered that somebody brought up her name as potentially having been the first African American graduate of ASU. And part of the reason why she's referenced in the book, which you'll see on one of the slides in a couple of minutes, is that at the time in 1923, when she started, she was not allowed to stay on campus. So she was renting a home from a local family, the Thomas family, that had a boarding home in Tempe for African-American travelers, folks. And she was a student, and she was able to get housing there. She came from Clifton, Arizona, where she was born. Her siblings were all born in Clifton as well. Her parents came from Texas, and they got married in 1901. And unbeknownst to my husband and I, we have the same wedding anniversary as his grandparents, October 23rd. And then they moved to Clifton, Arizona, where he was a smelter at one of the mines. And so they moved somewhere between 1901 and 1902. And then they had Louisa, their first daughter, who died young at 15 in Clifton from an illness. And Stella is the second oldest. And then they had Annie, and then Consuelo, who I mentioned earlier, was just a phenomenal individual and go-getter and journalist. And she probably could have been part of the Cronkite School if she was here today. And then my husband's father, who was the youngest of all of the 6 siblings. And then there was also his brother, Joseph. So if we can move through the slides, the picture that you're seeing actually right now is the graduation picture of Stella in the 1925, I believe it's called Saguaro yearbook. This is my husband, Joseph. He passed away January 2nd in 2019. He was a phenomenal person. And as I was listening to Dr. Bishop's work around the stories of African-American history, the reason why I'm here is because this is a passion project for me, and it's all about love. My husband, who died of cancer, which was connected to his military experience in the Army, he had Agent Orange exposure because he was a Vietnam helicopter pilot during the Vietnam War, and he developed cancer and passed away from that. So those are some of his military pictures, and that's when he was looking mod and hip in the late 1960s, that first picture, which is pretty cool. And that's him. He also was part of the Oregon National Guard, so that's the second picture, and then that's a picture of him, I believe it's taken in Vietnam, with the helmet on. And then that's an Air Medal Award that he won out of many that he won. And I just wanted to honor him by continuing the genealogy journey and continuing to discover information about Stella. So he passed away before I learned who Stella was in terms of ASU history. And on the next slide, here is how I got started here, because I was exploring, and I can be a bit of a bulldog when it comes to information that I'm trying to understand and learn. I just love to learn. And so I stumbled upon this website of ASU's, probably in 2020, I think it was. And I noticed that they had the first African-American graduate, who was a young man. And then they had also listed the first African-American female graduate as Love Hattie Jordan. And I thought, wait a second, the book that I learned about Stella in referenced that she was here around 1924, 1925. And they had Miss Jordan listed as graduating 1928. So I used modern technology and, chatted from that website to somebody at ASU and said, hey, can you first confirm my relative and, when she graduated? And I got a chat back saying, yeah, she graduated in 1925. So I said, well, then could you please correct your website? And I gave them reference to this, and the young person, whoever it was that responded, don't know who it was, said, okay, I'll forward it on. I didn't hear anything. I kept looking. I didn't hear anything. I kept looking. So I wrote again. And hey, I'm just trying to help you help yourselves and making sure you've got accurate information. And so lo and behold, I then got an email from the lovely Miss Shannon Walker there in the corner, who said, hey, yes, this information came to me to update the website. And I decided to go ahead and just do a little research about your relative. And wow, there's some interesting facts about her. And so, yes, we'll get the website updated, but do you mind if we go ahead and, do a little profile on her? And at first, I think you suggested a blog. I said, sure, go for it. And then the blog didn't come out, and it was February. So I was thinking, well, this should have come out in African-American History Month, and that didn't happen. So I wrote Shannon again, and I said, so, can you give me an update of what you all are going to do? And she said, well, we've actually forwarded this on, to one of our journalists, and would you be willing to have a conversation with the journalist to write a story? And I said, of course, no problem. So that came out in May of last year, 2022. And then from there, it sparked some interesting conversations with other folks here within ASU, including the Cronkite Journalism School. And Shannon and I were able to have a moment on the PBS television show, whose name is going to escape me right at this moment in time. Forgive me. Right. Thank you, Arizona Horizons. And then, and so it's just been a wonderful journey. And so for anybody that's curious about their family history or your family's history, I encourage you, there's so many tools out there now that you can do some research and find out to certain points. Certainly, there's a lot more to be discovered and a lot more to be put online, but new things come out all of the time. And again, if it wasn't for Jared's book, The African-American Experience in Tempe, and that was after years of Googling her name and nothing coming up. Then one day it was just there. So I encourage you not to give up and to continue to learn and continue to strive to document your family's histories with whatever permissions that you need from your families. I know some families, want to keep stories private, and I certainly respect that as well. And for other families, it's, that need to want to just have that documentation. And that's what drives me is, my husband didn't get to know his family, and he didn't know about who Stella was in ASU history while he was alive. But, he has grandchildren that, one of who attended ASU as well, and others who have taken classes at ASU. And so for the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, I want to make sure that both Stella as well as my husband's names are not lost in history. Thank you so much for your time.
So, Michele, I want to ask you a follow-up question. You started this journey as an effort of love for your husband, and adding stories to your children and grandchildren's lives. But what's the social importance of having information like one's personal family information corrected in a larger archive such as ASU? Why is that important for someone to do personal work that might end up in a community space?
Well, because we are a community. I mean, to me, it's really the reverse. It's about recognizing that as a community, everybody in this room has some connection to Arizona, or you wouldn't be sitting here, even if you don't live here, even if you weren't born here. But from a community perspective, that we're all human beings. And I think I look at this as honoring each of our humanity. because every person has a story. Every single person has a story. It may not be a famous story. It may not seem necessarily all that provocative, but at the same time, it's their story. And the level of connection that I think generations now are open to having with their relatives is huge. Part of this is also because seeing, the pain that my husband experienced by not knowing who his father's family was. And then the discoveries, even of just recognizing, because he didn't know his father's family, he didn't even know that Stella, his uncle, and his grandparents are buried right here in Phoenix. They are in unmarked graves. And so part of why we started this project was to figure out where they all were so that we could give them burial stones. And so that's still my mission that I'm committed to making sure it still happens. And so as you get to, for me, because I was not a historian, I did not necessarily do well in history in school. And so, but when it's out of love, there's just this driving force. And so if you're doing it out of love for your family, then you also want to make sure that your community knows that as well. So that's the community connection for me, because his kids didn't know anything about this and his grandkids didn't know. And the grandkids are just, super excited and just thrilled to be learning all of this stuff and saying, wow, grandpa was a pretty cool dude. And, and as well as all these other family members, it's like, wow, we have some pretty smart people in the family. And yes, you do. Because with Shannon's help, part of what we also learned by looking at some of the archives of history within Clifton, Arizona, was that all of the McHenry children, from Joseph and Maddie McHenry, they were always at the top of their class. So they were noted in the Clifton, Arizona newspapers from 1915, 1916, 1917 as, the top of the class of the colored school of Clifton, Arizona. So it's not just Phoenix, it's not just ASU, it's Clifton. And what does that mean? And just recognizing that, again, if who your parents were, who your grandparents were, them in a certain light. But when you then put them in the context of history and you put them in the context of what was, you juxtapose that with what's going on in the world at that time, all of a sudden I'm becoming this history buff that I never imagined I would be, because I'm like, oh, well, what else was going on in the United States or in the world at that time? And when you start to look up the old newspapers, then you get to see these stories of what was going on and all the different challenges that they experienced, and as well as the joy and the love, because this is not a story of victimization at all. This is a complete story of just joy and pride and love and progress. For Stella to come to Arizona, or excuse me, to Phoenix on her own, I mean, she had to been a pretty tough young lady to be able to do that and leave her family behind, because they didn't move here with her. She left Clifton. They were still in Clifton. Eventually, her parents did come and moved here somewhere. I'm not exactly sure yet. I think around 1927, because after Stella graduated in 25, then she became an elementary school teacher at Douglas School here in Phoenix. And then her parents and younger siblings moved to Phoenix and were some of the first attendees of Phoenix Colored Union High School. So if anybody has access to the 1927, 28, 29, 30 yearbooks, I'd love to see them, to see if, pictures of my husband's father and his brother might also be in there. And then again, to just continue to document, their places in history and in Arizona history as well too.
Thank you, Michele. So I want to use Stella's time period as a jumping off point for the next stage of the conversation. As we know, as we can imagine, because we don't know what Stella's experiences were like, but she came here to this university in the 1920s. So on the one hand, Arizona State University, Arizona, well, at that point in time, we would have been Tempe Normal School still. Okay, so you have a school, institution of higher education that's admitting Black students for the first time. That's incredibly progressive in that time period. The school I went to, Princeton University, didn't have its first full-time Black students unaffiliated with the military until 1960s. So we're ahead of a whole bunch of other institutions. But at the same time, Tempe, as Bruce had mentioned earlier, was what was known as a sundown town. And Black people were not allowed to own housing, were redlined out of this community during that time period. So we can only imagine what it must have been like for Stella and her peers to come here. Could they eat in the cafeterias? I don't know. But I want to fast forward then to the 1960s when Josephine was here. And I would love to hear some of your stories about the progress that ASU had made from that time period, and so that we can contrast it with the progress we've made until the Virgil Berry children have arrived, because I think it's a story of a lot of triumph that we need to remind our young people of quite often. As you mentioned, Josephine, there's something really special about being an integrated institution, but tell us about your time period.
Well, as I was listening to the various stages, I want to say too that I walked from the Fulton parking lot this morning. And as I thought about my walk, I thought about my husband's father, who lived at 14th Street and Adams. And he walked from 14th Street and Adams in the 1930s to Arizona State University. So for me, I perked up and it was a very short walk. I grew up about 5 miles from this university, as I told the audience this morning, in a little community called Okima. It was right over on 40th Street in South Phoenix. But academically, it was a long way away. Education was stressed, and ultimately, at one point, I and my 2 sisters were able to attend Arizona State University. I tell people that we had Monday, Wednesday, Friday outfits. My older sister wore it on Friday. I got to wear it on Wednesday. My other sister wore it on Monday. Nevertheless, we made it through. Started a trend. Both of my daughters graduated ASU, and I had 1 grandson to finish ASU. When I came to ASU, it was in about 1958 via Phoenix College. That was like the Southwest. It was like the company college. Because of finances, many of my classmates went to Phoenix College first, then we transitioned to ASU. We talk about requirements. The first shock was when I came to ASU, swimming was required. And I am so thankful now for the Crown Act. Swimming was offered on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you had to swim on those days. Thank goodness I told them about the San Francisco Canal. I learned to swim in the canal. So when I arrived at ASU, I could swim. All you had to do was swim across the pool. But for many African-American females, that was a deterrent because there was no such thing as an afro, and you could not be seen with your hair looking like many of our hair is today. The other thing was the social acceptance. There was no Black Student Union, no Delta Sigma Theta sorority, no Kappa fraternity on campus. So we gathered in the cafeteria usually. The greatest population were athletes. Coach Frank Cush did a tremendous job of recruiting. And many of the African Americans were male. They were recruited to play sports. So we would gather in the cafeteria, and that's where we socialized. There was no gathering other than that on campus. In order for us to really get together, we'd go to East Lake Park on Friday nights, and that was college night. So we'd go off campus. Usually we would attend the games. We studied in the library in groups. We formed bonds that helped support each other. That was how many of us were able to finish college here at ASU, by supporting each other, sharing notes, sharing classes, sharing textbooks, information. We had 1 or 2 students other than athletes who lived on campus. Housing was very, very segregated and restricted. I am so happy to talk to young people today and hear you talk about the diversity. There was no law school. When I came to ASU, I had dreams of being a dietitian. But I sat down with the counselor and she said, if you want a job, I had to have a job, go into education. That accounts for why I think so. Even though we loved education, we loved our teachers, we wanted to make ourselves known or invest in other careers, but we were guided into education. And so I'm very impressed when I talk to so many of you at the careers that you have chosen, the opportunities that you now are involved in, and you see that you can choose what you want to be and you can pursue that career. My oldest sister did graduate from the School of Nursing, but we were told to get a job, you need to go into teaching. So I chose education. ASU has changed, and I credit recently, dramatically, I credit that to your current president. I have met him, had some conversations off and on, and he is a visionary, and he dared to be an inclusion person. So when I look at Dr. Hassan, many other things that are going on at this university were totally foreign. So somewhere along the line, we learned that if we include people, give them a say, give them an opportunity, then we all move forward together. And so I'm happy to be an alumni, and I'm happy that you asked me this.
Yay, thank you. Thanks for sharing all of that, Dr. Pete. Really appreciate you. So we are actually running out of time. This time has gone by really quickly. So I would like to for Virgil and Tracee to share closing comments as you tell us about both your experiences at ASU and what you would like us as people who work here and research here to carry forward for future generations of Black alumni.
Well, one of the things that I really are enamored with ASU is the visionary aspect that you can basically become who you want to be, and we'll create a curriculum for it. When I was in school, we had a business policy class, and me and another African-American girl had an assignment of coming up with a new idea. And we came up with the idea that Makeup Avon should form a minority type of makeup line. And we thought that maybe Black people want, they want to have makeup that matches their skin, or do something with the do, or just they wanted their own products. And the teacher at that time was a Wall Street looking kind of guy, and he said, "That's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard." And kind of hit me for a minute, but shoot, I was getting ready to graduate. I really didn't care. I got a B out the class. I was happy. So, but I think that now those ideas, the university are accepted, and you can run with them. And I think if anything else that we've come far is we can see that you can have an idea and you can develop that idea and you can basically run with it. Because if that idea had helped me, I might be giving millions to the foundation by now.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Virgil. Yes.
So I think in summary, what I would say is important for ASU to remember, I know for me, and my mother talked about it as well in her experience when I was talking to her about this, is having a centralized place for people of color to come, where people look like them, they understand their struggles and can help guide them. My mother told me a story about sitting with two other people for a test, and because they were all Black, the teacher accused them of cheating. And my mother thought, these are not the people I would cheat off of. I was like, of anybody, but went to what was, I think, called the Educational Opportunities Program. Leader, his name was Dr. Chip Wheeler, and he advocated for her and with that teacher, and she was able to retake the test and got a high score and what have you. But for me, it was Dr. Brohard and MCE 394 and STARS, which was student taking action to reach success, also teaching us how to be, how to transition. And then while I was here, I was in a program called ACME, which was African Consolidated Mentors for Enhancement. And it was led by a student, Jeremy Levitt, where we went out to elementary schools and taught pre-colonial African history to students. And then ASU brought on the program. We did a whole summer program, but it also taught me about giving back, community investment. And I would just say that, making sure that we have and we know their struggles, right? Even though I came from an educated family, there were many times where I was very broke, had no computer, the computing commons, going to, and we know those stories that can deter people and they won't come back. So really figuring out how to capture and keep those individuals. And then in terms of connections and, when you think about philanthropy, it might not just be money. It might also be, can you come intern, or can I just help you, connect you to the greater community? Can I, are you interested in business or real estate? Can I connect you with someone that you could just talk to about what you need to know and what you need to do? Because a lot of times those connections will get you just as far as the education does. And a lot of times we don't have those opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. I really want to thank the organizers, Jessica, Shannon, Nancy, for all of the work you're doing all the time. This is huge. This space being made available to the community so that our stories can be embedded and invested in the university is not something to be taken lightly at all. It's to be celebrated, cherished, treasured, supported, funded, promoted. Please tell the rest of your peers about the great work that's happening here. Thank you, everyone.